we're going to drill down on recruiting, attracting, and retaining people, families, and workers. My key points are going to be housing, quality of life, the environment outdoors, and then audience and panelists will fill in the blanks. I'll introduce the panelists when I call on them. We're going to start with Macy Hirsch. She's the CEO of the Hmong Chamber of Commerce and a Wausau native. So let's just start, Macy, with you. And I'm wondering about the youth in the Hmong community and how they're feeling about sticking around and making their lives in Wausau and the region.
We dive right in, aren't we?
Yeah, let's go.
I love it. I've been taking lots of notes this morning already, and just lots of thoughts going through my head. And I appreciate you giving me this time right now to speak first, just because it's very much on my mind. I just happen to be, as mentioned, I am a Wausau native. I have lots of connections here in this area. Still do, and now with the Hmong Wisconsin Chamber of Commerce, we're statewide, but we have a satellite office here, and I still work here quite often. And one of the things I will say is this: with the younger Hmong professionals and the youth, they want to stay. They want to stay. Why? When people ask me, or when they ask these individuals, what's there? Quite frankly, what is there? Well, it's a beautiful red mountain. It's beautiful in the fall, but more importantly, and I'll say the same thing, it's the people, it's the families that keep them wanting to stay. They're invested in this community. However, what's happening is they end up applying for positions. They reach a certain point in their careers. They have growing families. They apply. Sometimes, or maybe half of the time, from what I hear, and also based on my own experience, I do get asked every so often to sit on a selection committee in this area. And what ends up happening is they might apply, they go through the interview process, and then don't get the job. So that happens often. I'll just take a quick note. I'm looking around this room right now. I'm very well aware when I walk into any space that I am one of few who look like me. All the time. I'm just happen to be now at a point in my career where I'm comfortable with who I am, and I don't have to worry about what other people think or what they're going to say. But there came a point in my life when that was huge. I had to do a lot of self-talking before I walk into a space and say, I belong here, right? My voice is important. I got something to contribute. It takes a lot out of someone, but you notice it right away. And these individuals, I look around the room, for some of you, I've actually sat on the search and screen committee for some of your positions. And I know, and I've talked to some of these individuals, like I said, within the Hmong community, who are now, they have these choices. They want to stay. They've applied for several positions, and then they haven't gotten them. And I can tell you, it's not because they haven't qualified. They usually get to a point, or I've heard from a few who would say things like, I was told later on I didn't qualify. Well, but then they applied and they got to the second interview or third interview or whatever it might be, didn't get the position. So now they're faced with other decisions. So I'll stop there. I'm going to
don't stop there. No, but let me just ask you, so what do you think that is the solution for that?
Well, I'll tell you what's happening.
Okay.
If they choose to stay, they're starting their own businesses, going into entrepreneurship, because there's no other way to go up. So then they create something that could potentially be in competition of the people they could have worked for, right? Or they're choosing to move up to the Twin Cities, right? They're moving somewhere bigger for more opportunities, and then they do. They don't go necessarily for the money, but they've got to move, right? They've got to move. They've got growing families. They've got to move up the ladder, but they're hitting glass ceilings constantly. Okay, but if the environment was right, their family's here, that takes precedence. They would stay here over a higher pay.
Lance Leonard, we're going to go to you, administrator at Marathon County. Now, you're not a Wausau native. What's your story?
Sure. Well, good morning, everybody. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to be on the panel. I am not a central Wisconsinite. I am one of the people in that generation of old who followed a job. So I went to school and had an opportunity looking for the next step in my career, and that step brought me here to central Wisconsin. That was 17 years ago. I figured, I'll be here for a while. As Macy said, I'll have an opportunity, and that opportunity likely is going to be somewhere where there are just more jobs. I'm in the legal field by trade before coming into local government. But I'll tell you, this place is sticky. It is really fabulous, and I think a lot of that, a big part of it, why I'm staying now, is I have a pretty great job, a front row seat to what makes it sticky. You know, I look at government's role, as was said before. We do a lot of the things that provide the foundation for communities to achieve kind of that their highest, most best use. You know, you look at government, we provide public infrastructure, provide public safety, and strive for public health. And those are the things that then our nonprofits, our local businesses, our education systems, it creates that environment for them to thrive. So that's kind of my story of why I stayed and why I think local government, to Macy's point about, you know, what can this community achieve? I mean, truly, not to steal Angel's job as the walking billboard, but I think the sky's the limit here. We have so many interesting things happening, and Dave brought it up before, and as did Darren. You know, there's so many people at the table, and I've had the pleasure, kind of, as I was early on in my career going through my educational period of my life, I bounced around. I lived in pretty much all corners of the state, and I haven't seen what I see here in those other places. And I think that's pretty special. It speaks to the people that have the opportunity to come together, and it's not ego-driven. It's not, hey, I want to be associated with something. It really is out of the best interest of the community, and we have so many things happening right now.
Isn't that the challenge? So what do you think is the biggest challenge for recruiting people? I mean, you must recruit people for local government too. So what's the biggest challenge?
I think it is part of the issue is we need to tell our story, and I think Angel said be a little less Midwest nice, and I don't think we need to brag. We just need to get out there and say something. We have so many things here in central Wisconsin that allow people to really have the opportunity to live where they want to be. I came here, most recently was from southeastern Wisconsin. I love to ski. What we have here with Rib Mountain State Park and Granite Peak, it is a one-of-a-kind destination. I feel this is a little self-deprecating here, but it's disappointing to me. I never knew all the great county parks and outdoor recreation we had until I took my new job and went on a tour with our parks department. We have some amazing assets. I think it was Paul who said we have water everywhere. We do. We have so many amazing opportunities. And when you look at what you can achieve individually with business and the diverse economy we have, whether you're in agriculture, the career family farm that are becoming less and less commonplace, but you can achieve that. You can go into any realm of business, whether it's healthcare, education, legal, finance, you name it, we have it. And if you do need to get away for a trip, we have an airport. We just have so many things here that I think we need to tell that story. As an employer, Marathon County's got just about 800 employees, and we absolutely have to be mindful of how do we bring in the best and brightest. The delivery of government services is a people business, and we need the best and brightest people to do that. And part of it is just telling the story. And once they come to our organization and see what our mission and vision is as an organization and see the mission and vision of our communities, we are much better at retaining than people might expect, but we need to tell that story.
Okay, I'm going to stay with you before I get deep into the housing piece, but talk to me a little bit about, Lance, about what the county is doing in terms of making downtown and redeveloping things along the river.
Sure. A credit to the county board, going back a number of years and talk about leadership. I think Paul said we have a blank slate in our downtown, and the county has been at the table to talk about what that future vision looks like, and I think we have a really interesting opportunity that, as Paul said, comes around once in a generation. The county, starting in 2017, 2018, really started to look at its operations as a whole. Marathon County, everyone, it's a small town, central Wisconsin. We're the 10th largest county in terms of population in the state. We're about Washington County's twin in terms of population size. So we're not small. We have a lot of things to bring people here. But in terms of county government, we have an excellent opportunity right now with that consolidation of our footprint. And the county over the last several years has been taking an opportunity to look at how to do that. We have 6 acres between a couple of parcels that are right located on the river. The river that started kind of as the driver of commerce with logging and paper. Now it's the driver of commerce, but it's through the driving of people, making a place where people want to come live. And I think that's the opportunity that the county has before it, to work with our local municipal partners to figure out what does the future redevelopment of those parcels look like. Quite honestly, it's an area where the county hasn't been historically very active in terms of economic development, but this is an economic development of a new type. It's a redevelopment. How can we take these parcels that were government buildings and really elevate them again to their highest and best use, right along our world-class kayak area on the river here in town. Whether that's housing, mixed-use development, really the sky's the limit for that area, and the city's been doing a fantastic job trying to look at what that future is going to look like, but the county can be a part of it.
This is Josh Showman. He's the county executive of Washington County. So, you were part of a panel that I was lucky enough to moderate in West Bend earlier this year, where you talked about, how your county, Washington County, is very involved in the housing, trying to drive the housing solution. Now, we only have a little bit of time. You don't have a PowerPoint, but try to encapsulate that for somebody who's not even familiar with the West Bend area. What are you trying to do with the federal money to solve the housing issue in your county?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to come and talk to you today. I heard somebody earlier say something to the effect of we don't have all of the amenities from being close to a large urban center like Milwaukee or Madison. And to Lance's point, we are almost exactly the same in terms of population. Quite frankly, our demographics are run very parallel to yours. If Washington County is the oasis for demography, Wisconsin's in crisis. It is not the panacea. I think most of all of the state of Wisconsin is really in the same boat, and we're not much different than you in almost any way, shape, or form. Washington County has close proximity to Milwaukee, no doubt. I-41, Interstate 41, which is a new interstate, which most of the world is just realizing is a new interstate, is a huge part of a lifeline for us all the way up to the Fox Valley. But people in the last probably 2 years have really started to associate me and Washington County with housing, much to the excitement of people like Mike Theo. But the reality is our focus hasn't really been so much on housing as the next generation. And it's really about how do we retain. I've been to so many of these panels and so many discussions, both locally in southeast Wisconsin and across the state, and everybody's focusing on how do we attract and do better to be more welcoming, and how do we get people to move to where we're at. And the bottom line is, we do a pretty crappy job of keeping our own kids, so how the heck are we going to solve a problem of bringing different people here? It's a huge hurdle for us to overcome. Washington County graduates right now about 2,000 high school students per year out of our high schools, both public and private. Our high schools are so bad at retaining our kids that we don't even keep track of the data. So we don't know where they all go. But our best guesses when talking to superintendents is about 50% of our kids go off to four-year institutions of higher education. About 25% of them go off to the military or sow their wild oats and God knows where. And then we think about 25% of them stick around, whether they live in mom and dad's basement or rent an apartment and work locally, something to that effect. The bottom line is we keep about 25% of each graduating class from Washington County. Out of 2,000 kids, we keep about 500. Well, there's multiple problems with that. Number one, currently we graduate about 2,000 kids per year. The 7th grade class, and this is not just Washington County, this is Marathon County, this is Portage County, this is all across the state of Wisconsin. It's going to drop about 30%. And it's just the birth dearth from the Great Recession, 2008, 2009. How do I know? Because I was the only one having kids in 2008 and 2009. The number of kids that are going to start graduating in about the next 5 years is going to drop off precipitously. It's going to create major crises for the institution like the one we're sitting in right now. It's going to create even worse crises for the workforce of tomorrow. And if we can't figure out how to retain that 500 kids out of 2,000 to become 1,000 kids out of 1,500, this problem is going to get exponentially worse. So for us, we looked and thought, what is stopping our kids from coming back? If 50% of them are going off to college, why when they're 22 or 25 or 27 and starting to have kids, when most of them want to get out of Milwaukee County or get out of the urban center and quite frankly back to grandma and grandpa to help raise their kids, why aren't they coming home? And the first hurdle just so happens to be Mike Thiel's profession. No, the first hurdle is housing. They have nowhere to live. Almost every single day, I take a look at Realtor.com to watch how many houses are for sale in Washington County below $300,000, not pending, not contingent. And you think, well, $300,000? That's insane. Well, $300,000 for a household, both partners of the household making about $25 an hour, is the kind of the max of what they can afford at 30% of their income. So in other words, $300,000 is the new starter home. Now normally when I give these talks and I focus specifically on housing, I start by having the whole room talk to one another about your very first home, the first home you ever owned. And it probably sounds something like this: 1,000 to 1,500 square feet on a quarter-acre lot, depending on which generation you're from, determines how many zeros were behind that first mortgage. But it was humble beginnings. Most all of Wisconsin has a story like that. Ladies and gentlemen, today that does not exist. And if they can't even think about moving into our community, forget the other hurdles. Forget how are they going to get over the student loan debt or the child care crisis or being able to afford a car, on and on and on and on. Which, by the way, when you start adding up all of those things, you hit 100% of their income pretty fast without paying for diapers and groceries and utilities. So, to me, housing, next generation housing as we call it in Washington County, is really about how do we figure out how to get our kids back. Because if we can't figure that out, all the rest of the discussion kind of becomes moot. We can't even figure out how to get the people who were raised in the character and the values that define whether it's Marathon County or Washington County or Dane County. It doesn't. Wisconsin, if we can't figure out how to get them back, how are you going to bring strangers here?
Okay. So where can people find out about the details of your housing plan? You have a website, right?
I do. WashcoWisco.gov is the best place to look.
Say it again?
WashcoWisco.gov. WashcoWisco.gov.
Okay, so that's really worth looking at, everybody, in here and online. I mean, you're using ARPA money to start a big program, aggressively start a big program. Okay, Mike Theo, you're our housing expert, the CEO of the Wisconsin Realtors Association. So let's just start by defining, the housing crisis, not just here, but I mean, generally, like how short are we and what's it going to take to make it up?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and good morning, everybody. Good morning. As you said, you used the right words. We have a housing crisis. It's in Wisconsin, and it's across the country as well. And it's a simple but not simple supply and demand problem that we have. And this starts not with the pandemic, but in the Great Recession. We have not kept pace in building new housing to keep up with the demand rising. And prior to this escalation in interest rates, we had this sustained low interest rate environment, and there was a lot of churning in the real estate marketplace. But we weren't building enough housing to keep up with the demand, the demographic realities that were coming. And we see it now, I say, in a crisis. I would define where Josh said it really well, that we can't build the kind of housing most of us had as a first-time home buyer. And it's a simple then supply and demand issue. And we've had, I think now, probably three and a half years where the sales of homes in Wisconsin compared to the same month the prior year, the sales have been down double digits for 3 or 4 years now. And conversely, the price, the simple reverse of that, the price has gone up at a similar rate.
Right, inventory is down.
And inventory is, new listings are horrible. And so the solution to looking at that problem is to try to do something about that supply. Part of it's demographic. Part of it, baby boomers like me need to move out of their houses, but there's nowhere to go, so we stay put.
You have to go in handcuffs on.
And most of those folks are locked in at an interest rate in a 15 or 30-year fixed rate mortgage that is substantially lower than what you could get at a lending institution today. So if you're going to retain or attract or keep home buyers, people, workers, every business I talk to says we've got to do something about the housing crisis. And given the supply issue, what we need to look at is trying to find ways to expedite and invest in new housing construction or rehabilitation of existing structures that aren't inhabitable.
Okay. And to this end, I think we should educate people that there's action in the legislature revolving a set of bills that the Wisconsin Realtors Association were instrumental in pushing. And without going through every bill, what's the general thrust? What are you trying to do with this legislation that's probably going to pass the both houses of the legislature? Yeah,
this discussion and conference is timely. In the state Senate and in the state Assembly this Wednesday, there's a package of 5 bills that have made it through committees. They're identical bills. They're going to, I would guess that they're going to both pass. They're going to both, or sets of 5 legislation. All of those bills will pass both houses and probably make it on its way to the governor's desk shortly if the budget doesn't get in the way. But what we're seeing, what I would characterize those bills as trying to expedite and the process of permitting new homes, in part of it, getting development projects past local government, regulations, tries to streamline some of those regulations. That's one package. Another package is in financing, in rehabilitation and conversion of empty commercial space to residential. Some involve WIDA, low-interest loans, and they look at things like infrastructure investments to try to facilitate and expedite the building process. One interesting bill that's created some more discussion than some of the others is referred to in the Capitol as the NIMBY bill, or the anti-NIMBY bill, not in my backyard. But what that really does is it says Local units of government can adopt any kinds of housing regulations they want. Their zoning laws, their permitting processes, their land use planning, et cetera, et cetera. But once those criteria is in place, if a developer comes with a development plan and it meets all of that criteria, it can't be stopped by a few neighbors. And there'll always be a few neighbors that don't like a new development. But it puts the local government officials and the developer in a position of being able to get, if it meets all of your criteria, it has to be approved. And if it's not approved, there's a judicial remedy that the developer can go through. And hopefully, we can try to use that process to say, we're complying with your plan, now you have to comply with your plan to the local units of government. I think if that happens, hopefully, it's been tried, bits and pieces of this have been tried across the country to varying degrees of success. And I'm hoping that the opportunities that legislation and the other bills provide will help kickstart and start to address that supply shortage.
Okay. Now, you want to chime in here? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. So let me just give you some illustrations in practical terms. Obviously from the Realtors Association, we're looking at 120,000 feet, but practically speaking, here's what this means. Washington County, all of Washington County right now, 300,000 and below, 17 homes total in the whole county for sale this morning. 17 total, 300,000 and below. Not pending, not contingent. And 2 of those 17 are 55 and older community. I have 600 vacancies in the industrial park in West Bend by itself. Okay? So in real time, to use Mike's term, crisis is not an understatement in any way, shape, or form. Now, we have created the crisis in terms of housing in particular, and Mike touched on it, but I don't want it to get lost. There's 2 major hurdles that we have created as a society in America in regard to starter homes. One is we stopped lending for them. The federal government, if you bought one of those houses post-World War II America, or your parents or grandparents did, you know, the little salt box, 1,000 square foot on a quarter-acre lot with 1-car detached garage, that lending probably came from the Federal Housing Administration. They had a nice package, 1% loans to developers, Levittown, USA, Pennsylvania, 1% loan to that developer, thousands of homes they built, and the municipalities wanted it because it's new prosperity, right? The restriction was simple. That kind of house has to be built. It has to have this kind of regulation, and no black people are allowed. Federal government rules. Okay? The other issue, now fast forward to the 1980s, the private banks got into the business. 2 Republican presidents, Nixon and Reagan, start Section 8 and expand Section 8 housing, and then they get out of the lending business to these small developments. So the private sector gets in, and that works really, really good until 2008. And then we over-leverage like crazy. M&I Bank goes out of business, gets bought out, literally because they over-leveraged down in Arizona. And then Dodd-Frank regulates the ability for them to finance that type of development. You want to know why nobody's getting any financing for developments like that? Because the federal government's regulated it away. They literally can't do it. So Mike and his team, and quite frankly, states around the country, are having to come up with these mechanisms to finance them on their own. In Washington County, Next Generation Housing, one pillar is literally creating the financing to allow for this to happen. But the other problem is the one that we have much more control of at the local level, and we've done it to ourselves. In Washington County, when we started Next Generation Housing, every community that we work with, the minimum lot size that they allowed in their codes, 8,000 square feet. That's just over a third of an acre. In some, it was 10,000 square feet. You're talking half-acre lots. You want to know why you can't build a starter home? Because we don't let you. And then if we do let you build it, you got to put brick on it, and you have to have a fancy light pole next to it. You got to have this pretty little brick mailbox on it, and you have to have 66-foot right-of-ways, and you have to have 20-foot setbacks on both sides. You know, that stuff costs money. And anybody who's in local government in here, I hate to break this to you, the developer doesn't pay for that. The buyer pays for it with a little premium that the builder and the developer charge. So to Mike's point, it's really actually pretty simple. We've regulated away the ability to finance it, and we've regulated away the ability to build it. The good news is, we broke it, we can fix it, and those 5 bills are a good start.
Okay. So now you get to reflect on everything that everybody talked about in terms of, again, we're talking about recruiting people, retaining people, getting them back if they left. So to your end, what's the secret sauce? Is it a job, the best job, the best affordable housing? What is it?
Well, it's a complex situation. And when I say that, from a chamber perspective, when we stepped back and we created the Greater Wausau Economic Development Strategic Plan, it aligned against, again, talent, innovative companies, and placemaking to build a place to attract and retain talent to support our innovative companies. So what's that mean? To reinvent our community, our place, the downtown. And so that's moving forward. To be able to connect our education institutions and our students, our K-12s, to opportunities for innovation, learning. My experience working with the students at UWSP, I can name 3 of them right now we started entrepreneurs. One of them is a millionaire already, and the other one's on the way. We have that opportunity in the big sphere. But for the chamber, so when you look at the big picture, that the Greater Wausau Prosperity Partnership is working on the big picture. Same time, the chamber, and I have my strategic plans here in front of me, and I do all the time, is because while one's doing one to build the community, to build that vibrant place, the chamber is working boots on the ground to make sure that we're aligning what the students in the K-12s are doing with the DPI, career clusters, aligned to our business and industries, that we make it easy for those people, the educators, the students, the families, to connect and make sure that they understand the career opportunities here. Boys and Girls Club. If you don't know this about Boys and Girls Club, we have a phenomenal Boys and Girls Club here. Those students, those kids that live, there's about 400 of them in the club. They don't leave. They love being here. And the sooner that this community, this region, understands that we have people in this community to craft local talent, building your community's workforce with workers you already have. Big picture, the visionary stuff, the downtown, the vibrancy, boots on the ground, is making sure you're working to keep those students, those people, those who need uplifting, more skill development, more economic uplift, that you're putting efforts there too. And that's a big partnership that has to happen here. To your point, absolutely. Miles Shaver, building the headquarters economy, while we'll never compete against a Minneapolis, St. Paul, or Chicago for headquarters. There are specific things that we can do as a community to make sure we're putting efforts to help those professionals to uplift, to pathway here, to remove those barriers. It's development, it's pay. But if we don't have these things going on here, they're complex and overlapping, we don't compete.
Okay. Macy, from what, you started us off and you talked about the importance of family for your community, but I'm guessing that that's for a lot of people who grew up in Wausau.
Sure.
So, from what you've heard, are things on the right track? Again, what's missing? What's missing from the conversation that will bring people back if they left?
Well, one thing I'm noticing is, and this is, again, I sit on many of these types of panels as well, and I've been part of many of these types of conversations. I see a lot of people writing things down, and I think that's great. I think that once we say, okay, we put a box around it and say, okay, we got to recruit for some more diversity, right, whatever that means. It has to go beyond that. Now, how are we going to keep them here? How are we going to continue to make them feel like they belong here? Otherwise, they're not going to stay here very long. And I'll tell you right now, in the Hmong community, if you don't know, it's not 7 degrees, 6 degrees of separation. It's just a couple of degrees of separation. So one person has a good experience, they will tell someone else, really fast. But if they, and that, whether that's at a business, at a corporation, university, in the community, word spreads fast. Okay, and let me just give you an example. Let's just say Facebook, for example. Just about any Hmong person on that Facebook page, I'm probably connected to at least one person, to just about every Hmong person in the nation. Okay, or at least I know someone who knows someone. That's how quickly and how close they are. Okay, so I think that certainly a sense of belonging, not just welcoming, but obviously resources for them to raise their families and so forth. I think that's going to be very important. Opportunities for growth. I think a pathway we're calling, right? A pathway for them to be successful, meeting those individuals where they could, there could be built, those relationships could be built. If the individuals at the top don't know who these individuals are in the Hmong community, these young professionals, then those pathways need to be built. They need to be created so that those relationships can happen. And by the way, Dave's here, I'm here, Lance serves with us at the Hmong Chamber as a board member. He knows, and I'll say this, many of us have, many connections in this community. And if you called us and said, hey, do you know anyone who might be interested in this or that or whatever it might be, personally, I have lots of connections. And as a chamber, we have lots of connections.
Okay. All right, let's go for some audience questions.
Yeah, I moved here 2.5 years ago, and I would say my salary was very middle class. I know we talked about housing, but as far as apartments, I found it really hard to find an apartment that I liked, but also that was within my price range. So how do we, if that's the step we want to take, how are we going to start making, well, how do we define affordable housing? It's like there's nothing for that middle class section.
Yeah, okay, let's go with Mike and then Lance. Comment on that, what's the range, what's the sweet spot for somebody like our questioner?
There's a great study done, I think 2 years ago at UW-Madison Urban and Land Economics on the housing crisis, and they used the term workforce housing, not affordable housing per se, or subsidized housing, not just plain free market. And they use a range, I think, of 80% of county median income. And we're talking about in that workforce housing definition, like, firefighters, city employees, teachers, and in that range. And that's really where we have the most acute problems in Wisconsin. And at the high end, you can, with a huge minimum lot size or some of the other zoning requirements, a builder could still, if they get their building supplies, can still build and make money at that level. But the zoning, this is where the government regulations really hurt the construction, is in that workforce housing. That's why this legislation is trying to focus in on that. But I think your point is important because you're competing in a rural area. You're not just competing with, regional, on a regional basis or between urban and rural. What you're really competing against is the entire country that's in the same predicament. So this sense of urgency really needs to be moved up when it comes to the issue of housing. And so anyways, that's the price ranges, and apartments and multifamily dwellings are not exempt from the same pressures that residential, single-family residential construction is under.
So Lance.
Mike's spot on with, the numbers are the numbers. I think one piece I hope everyone leaves with is there is low-hanging fruit, and Josh and Washington County have put out a very nice roadmap. I encourage everyone to go look at the Next Generation Housing website. We need, first and foremost, to fix the things that we put in place that are barriers, as was said. We can get at the table with our municipal partners and look at how does Marathon County zoning and local zoning create a barrier for developers for whatever type of housing they're interested in building. One of the things you might find interesting, the county board funded a metro housing study in 2022, and it came back with some really interesting data. Certainly on the workforce housing side, we have some real challenges for houses that people are looking for to buy, that with, back when I bought my house, when you could get a house for less than $120,000 to buy it, we're real light there. But interestingly, we're also light on what Mike just talked about with houses over that $300,000 or $400,000 market area, market demographic. And what that does, and it's not surprising, Josh alluded to this, puts a whole lot of strain on the middle. You have, whether it's individuals kind of getting closer to retirement, they're staying in their homes longer, which is a great thing, but it puts pressure on individuals who are looking for that kind of next step. So they can't move, which puts more pressure on the workforce housing side. So I think, it is a complex piece, as Dave alluded to, but, let's not have paralysis by further analysis. We need to do something. And the bills that were talked about, it's good that government at the state level is talking about it, but local government needs to do the same. Come in the room, talk about what zoning codes, what processes do we have in place that are creating, I don't want to just say any burden, because there are a lot of things that regulation does that are really, really important. Safety, ensuring there's appropriate infrastructure, those things are vitally important to kind of the wealth generation, that housing, for those of us that own our own homes, that's really one of the positive pieces of housing. That's why it's vitally important. It is that wealth generator for generations. So local government needs to be at the table, and I think that's the thing that after this meeting, our county board is working to develop their roadmap similar to what Washington County has. We are at this crisis stage in the state of Wisconsin and nationally, but there are enough nuances in our own individual lived experiences in our own individual counties and municipalities that we do need to tailor the solutions, and we can't lose sight of that.
I want to follow up on her question. When I graduated from college, my first 3 homes were apartments. And if you look at what's going on in terms of growth rate, and I'm going to pick Altoona, Eau Claire, which I spent a little bit of time with. It is not our sense of what a home is, it's the sense of what apartments are and communities are for late millennials and Zers. Recently, I read an article in Forbes magazine and the Pew study. This love affair with traditional homes may not be there for the generations behind us for a lot of different reasons. And you have to ask yourself, are we focusing on the wrong type of housing versus the type of housing that's 10 minutes from the trailhead, or I can add this recreational component to where I want to live and community. I lived in Europe, the Netherlands, for 4 years, and their idea of homes is completely different than our sense. It's apartments that, and it's a different sense of community. And when you look at late millennials and the Zers, it reflects more of that European look on their jobs as well as housing. Are we missing the market thinking through our eyes it's a traditional home, a traditional quarter acre, and traditional this? You go to Altoona and you go to Eau Claire, 9.3% growth, second fastest growing communities in the state versus Madison. It's a completely different landscape for housing.
All right, so let's, thank you very much. That's a great point. Are we trying to, Josh, keep it short here, but are we trying to reinvent some ideal that is no longer desired by the generations that are going to want housing?
Asking a politician to keep it short.
Yes,
okay.
And I know you can do it.
Okay. Let me answer as a millennial. When I read that Forbes article, and there's several articles in that same vein of thought that I've read. And if you look at the data for the older millennials, I'm the oldest of millennials, born in 1981. If you look at the data for the older millennials, the ones who are finally now getting married and having kids, they're doing the same thing as every other generation before them. They're running out of the suburbs. They're running out to the exurbs. They have the luxury of remote work, so places like Marathon County all of a sudden are a possibility, and maybe they never were before. But they want exactly the same thing. And the big danger of the narrative that of what Europe is, there's a reason America went the direction it did. And I think the biggest reason, and Lance touched on it before, is that starter home, I mean, I don't care if it's a condo or a townhome, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's multifamily, if it's single family, that's not the point. The point is, if it's an apartment and they're paying that $1,800 a month to a landlord forever, they're never going to recover from that. If that $1,800 is going to their mortgage, it is the single greatest generational wealth builder in America. And it is what differentiates us from Europe. So I think we have a job and a responsibility to train my kids and the millennials and Gen Zers who are younger to say, yeah, multifamily, fine. By the way, they can't build it actually much cheaper than single family, but we get into that later. Bottom line is, no, I don't think it's the wrong answer. I think the right answer is home ownership. The question is, how do we achieve it? And it's probably different than we did in the 50s and 60s.
I would build on the intergenerational wealth factor of ownership versus renting, and I do agree. You could have condos and multifamily ownership, but I think don't lose sight of the fact that, and there's multiple studies over multiple years on this, the ownership factor of having property in a community has a beneficial socioeconomic benefit to the family, to the individuals, and to the communities when the home ownership rate is higher. Their kids do better in school, crime rates go down. There's just an investment in that community when it's your property. And that's something we have to make available to everybody in the state of Wisconsin. This gets to Macy's, some of what she was saying. And we have the second worst black home ownership rate in the country in Wisconsin. And part of that is just the lack of ownership throughout history at a time when redlining by lenders and actually discrimination within the housing profession kept them out of the housing. It still has an effect by look at how our home ownership rates are today. So again, I'll get back to closing with this sense of urgency. There's a competition, and it's not just for retaining or for attracting. It is for every business at every level that I think the housing issue needs to be addressed sooner rather than later.
All right, David, you have the last word.
One closing point. I am a boomer and a Gen Xer. I have 1 foot in each generation. I'm more of a Gen Xer. But here's the opportunity. My wife and I, after our kids went down to Madison, went to school, my wife and I sold our house in Rothschild to a young family, and we've opted for the downtown lifestyle. There's more and more boomers that are now retiring that want to move out of their homes and move downtown, move into that vibrancy, into that community, freeing up the housing stock throughout this area. There's an opportunity all throughout Wisconsin to do that. You're talking about people who have accumulated capital, wealth, where they want to go and have fun in a walkable, safe community. There's an opportunity there.
All right. Hey, let's hear it for this panel. And thank you, questioners. Great questions.